it was amazing having programmers I could talk to about my favorite programming language in real life when I would go to the conference, or when like Matthias Long, he came here to Korea to work for a while, and he and I could hang out and chat about D. I could chat about D with people in his office. It was awesome. It was the first time I had people here in Korea I could talk about programming with, right? And these days, all the kids go to Discord, so there's a great group of people there in Discord too. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and if you find that you enjoy the D language, we are always looking for people to help us out to make it even better. So we'd love to have you raise your hand. I'm pretty sure I brought it up there. And, Andre did his little skeptical face, and they didn't seem too enthused about it. But I think it was a couple nights later in the lobby again during DConf, which we didn't have that name yet. But uh, Andre pulled me aside. He's like, tell me about this blog idea. And another thing I would tell them is that you'll find a lot of familiar stuff in D if you have a background in any of the C style languages. It's not going to feel alien. It's you might even feel at home once you try it.
Hey, what's going on, folks? It's Mike here, and today I'm very excited to bring to you this conversation with Mike Parker. Mike Parker has been part of the D community since the very beginning, and throughout this conversation, we're going to learn about his origin story of how he got involved with programming in the first place, and then ultimately how he found the D programming language. For those of you who don't know Mike Parker, you've probably seen his forum posts, his blogs, or maybe even his 2 books that he's written. He's certainly been a prominent member and was very knowledgeable and had a lot to share throughout this conversation. And Mike's a wonderful storyteller. He does a great job writing and talking about the D programming language throughout this conversation and its history, and he even runs his own YouTube channel, Mike from Korea, if you enjoy his storytelling, so definitely check that out. It's very fun and lighthearted and full of history and facts and fun stories. So with that said, we're going to talk about it all today, so just sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Mike Parker. All right, folks, it's a real pleasure here to have with me Mike Parker, who is part of who I've gotten to know through the D community. And typically, I'm on the other side of these conversations where Mike's been interviewing me. So it's a real pleasure to have Mike and give him the chance to be the star. I just felt it was time. So, Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. I'm not used to this, so it's it's a new experience for me being on this side of the interview.
Yeah, so folks haven't seen the community conversations that Mike does with the D community. They've been really wonderful, and I'll definitely be linking to those. But Mike's also been doing some YouTube work with his Mike in Korea videos, which I also want to highlight towards the end of this, which is really great, just relaxing and at times very funny and insightful series. So I definitely want to ask you about your YouTube journey and what you've been doing there, because I really enjoy the videos. In particular, Operation Mother-in-Law is a good one. So,
well, I'm glad you like that one because that one is not one of the more popular ones. But but yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. But so where I want to kind of start, where I start with a lot of my guests is, to learn a little bit about their programming journey, how they got involved with it, and I want to ask you about what you remember about Space Invaders and maybe your first Atari 2600.
Yeah, that was one of those life-changing moments, when I saw Space Invaders, and I've tried to figure out exactly when it was, and I guess it must have been 1979, around that time, maybe 1980. I can't be sure, but there was a little 7-Eleven near my neighborhood, and my mother would sometimes send me there. Can you imagine that? I was what, 8 years old, 9 years old, and she'd send me to walk. It was a 25 minute walk, and I'd go out there to pick something up for her. And I walked in there one day, and there was this big machine standing there, this big box thing, and 4 or 5 guys were standing around it. And I kept trying to see what it was, and it was Space Invaders, and I just it blew my mind to see. I'd never seen anything like it before. That was a whole new world to me. And so, yeah, I would spend as much of money of my mother's as much of my mother's money as I could, wasting time down there on that. And so it wasn't long after that that my father got an Atari 2600, and he and I would play Asteroids, Space Invaders. There was an Indiana Jones game, an ET game, all kinds of stuff. It was good times. But they would never buy me a computer.
Mm-hmm.
They would never buy me a computer because they thought I was just going to use it to, play games. And I kept telling them I wanted to learn how to make games, but they didn't see the point in that for, such a financial investment. So they never would buy one. So that didn't happen.
So were you able to, I guess, game for a while? Did you try to find programming manuals or anything else, or what was kind
Yeah.
of your early journey?
Well, what would happen is, my mother would take me to Sears, which, for non-Americans or probably even for younger Americans today was kind of a budget department store back in the day. And they would have this counter full of computers there, and each computer would have a little manual next to it, and they had sample programs in them, basic programs. So, the first program I ever learned to write was the classic 10 print mic 20 go to 10, and I would just do that on every computer on the counter that I passed. But my uncle got a computer, and I cannot remember if I think it was a Commodore 64, but I can't be sure. But I would fool around on that while I was at his house, and I could spend hours in his room on that office. And I could never complete any programs. I just type in as much as I could while I was there. But yeah, that was pretty much the extent of my programming experience as a child. I kind of got interested in other things once I gave up on trying to get a computer, and it was many years before I came back to it.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess also back in that time, I mean, even still today, a lot of schools don't have computers or computer programming. I'm assuming it was the same. No, Macintosh or wasn't showing up at that point either. Or...
Well, we had, I was in the special class, which at the time they called it SCORE. It was for gifted students. So twice a week, we would come out of our regular classroom in elementary school, this was, and they would take us into the special class with where we would do interesting things. We used to do stop motion animations and all kinds of stuff. And they had a computer in that room that we would use for different things. And mostly what I remember from that was playing Oregon Trail. So, but other than that, yeah, there weren't really any computers for the students in the school anywhere. And all through my school career, to junior high and senior high. And it wasn't until I was in the Army that I, got to use a computer regularly. When I was a medic and I was in our little aid station, we had a computer at the front, and I had to use that sometimes. And my roommate in the barracks bought a computer, and he used to give me time on it. But again, I wasn't programming then at all. Not at all. So it wasn't until I was about 26 that I bought my first PC. I think it was a Pentium 2.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been in early 1998, and that's when I finally said, "Okay, I've got this computer. I own it. I can do what I want with it. I'm going to learn how to program." And I was in Korea at the time, and I was working on the Army. I was out of the Army. I was working on the Army base at the hotel there. And we had a bookstore on base. So I went in there to find a programming book. And the one that caught my eye, Learn to Program Java 1.1 in 21 Days by Laura LeMay. So the reason it caught my eye, I was flipping through it, and the applets I thought were amazing, that I could run a program on a web page, right? So that's where I learned to program. First with Java and then with C. Yeah.
So, I mean, you remember the title and author of the book. I mean, that must have been pretty insightful. I mean, was this pretty much you picked up the book and just poured through it? As soon as you got it, you got the programming bug back, so to speak?
Yeah, I worked through it, chapter by chapter, did all the examples. Then I started using examples I found online. The internet was sparse back then,
Mhm.
but there was still a lot of information out there. Um, yeah, so uh, yeah, I don't know why I remember that title. I just do. I don't remember most of the books that I looked at that time, but that one it's kind of emblazoned on my mind, probably because I spent so much time with it, trying to work everything out on my own. I remember struggling. I remember it took me that one of the first hurdles I had, they had you working with individual objects in the
Mhm.
beginning, right?
Mhm.
Individual classes. And one of the struggles I had was trying to figure out how to get the different classes to communicate. It was a weird problem to have. I don't know why I found that confusing,
Mhm.
but I eventually got over it. But yeah, that was fun.
Interesting. So were they introducing already things like message passing and this type of thing as far as
No,
that
no, no,
type of
no,
communication? Or oh, okay.
no. I just mean the examples in that book were mostly just isolated examples with
Mm.
with one class or something. Most of the time you did everything inside one class, so when it got to the point of getting different classes to interact,
Mm.
I couldn't figure that out for a little while. um, but yeah, I had a lot of fun with that, and I made a lot of applets. Yeah, I miss applets.
Any that are still in existence? Do you keep a, I don't know, GitHub repository or any of your first code, first Java code?
No, no, that stuff disappeared with my first PC, wherever that went. So yeah, I don't have any of my old code anymore. Um, Unfortunate, because later I was learning C, and I discovered, there were these different individual websites about game programming, about game
Mhm.
development, and the owners of these websites came together and created GameDev.net.
Mhm.
And so I signed up pretty early on for that and would go through all the resources there. And I got my hands on some Andre Lamothe books,
Mhm.
and I started getting into direct draw. And I think the first book I got of his was the Windows programming, Secrets of the Windows Game Programming Gurus, or something like that.
Mhm.
I don't remember what it was called, but it made a 2D game library on top of direct draw. And
Mhm.
so I worked through that book and modified the library, did my own stuff with it. And so the first complete game I ever made, I made with that library that I developed through that book. That was a lot of fun. That was a lot of
Yeah, I've got a stack of those Andre Lamothe, those very thick books that he would write on my bookshelf.
fun. Yeah, you know what's funny is in those days he had this website. I think it was called extremegames.com.
Mhm.
And so I was a lurker in that community, but there was one of the members there that became active in the D community
Hmm.
at around the same time I did several years later.
Okay, yeah, tell
which
tell me
was a
about
which was
this.
Oh no, it was what was it, Nick Sabolowski?
Okay.
Abscissa
Hmm.
was his handle in the D forums. I saw that handle in the D forums one day. I was like, wait a minute, is that Abscissa from Extreme Games? Um, so it was kind of funny to say, we didn't know each other, but we had
Yeah.
that connection. It was kind of strange, unusual, unexpected. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, as you say, back then news groups and forums especially were super popular. As
Hmm.
far as that's where I learned a lot of my programming, just going on. For me, it was the Dark Basic forums, and
Hmm.
which was a game basic programming language, and just chatting with members, and then many of them would leave to the C++ community as well. So you'd see some
Right.
overlap and kind of migration. Um, but yeah, how lucky are folks today to have YouTube and books and unlimited internet to learn from? Things would have been different for you, huh?
Yeah, very different. I think I would have learned. Well, I don't know if I would have learned a lot more quickly. I had that problem that I was too eager,
Mhm.
and I didn't
Yeah.
take the time to crawl before I started to run. And I would just dive right in and get lost and confused and have to backtrack and start again. But with all the resources available today, yeah, I think it would have helped tremendously. It would have helped get me going faster, I think. Um, but yeah, they are very lucky today. And you know what's funny is I did not see the point in learning from videos
Mm-hmm.
when this started to become a trend. You know, for
Mm-hmm.
me, I was so used to text-based tutorials, right? Written
Mm-hmm.
tutorials and books. And but then this trend started with all these tutorials coming out on YouTube, and I just didn't get it at first, but now I do. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
now I do. And if I'm trying to learn something new these days, YouTube's the first place I go to.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole new world.
It really is kind of interesting. I mean, well, both of us being in the YouTube space and making content, I find myself doing the same thing. I mean, I'm still very much a book learner when I need to slow down.
Mhm.
And I've got the same sort of issue still probably to this day where I want to run before I'm crawling, so I always have to fight that.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I don't want to see, a triangle on the screen. I want to see a ship, you
Yep.
know. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, during those early days, when you're whether it's hanging out at the extreme programming forums or kind of lurking there, or just learning Java or C, did you have any kind of big insights as far as aha moments when programming clicked? Do you kind of remember maybe concepts that just, oh, now I get it? Or you finally figure out when the Java classes connect or or so on.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest aha moments was when I finally started to understand the relationship between vectors and matrices and all of the 3D the basics. For a long time, I was reading and implementing without grokking.
Mhm.
It didn't it didn't click for me, and then one day it did, and I was able to work things out on my own, without
Mhm.
having to consult a book
Mhm.
to painfully figure out what's going on. It was a tremendous milestone, I think. uh, but unfortunately, graphics programming turned out not to be my strength. Or even, it wasn't the interest that I thought it was. Yeah.
Mhm.
So there were a lot of things I got really interested in those early days that I thought, oh, I got to learn this, I got to do this, and then once I started doing it, I'm like, yeah, maybe it's not what I
Mhm.
really want to be doing. So, but yeah, that was yeah, figuring out, being able to do that one step that I got through, that was probably the biggest aha moment I had over the years. Uh,
And did you get to that aha moment? Was it just kind of pounding away at, trying different things, or did you have an analogy, or maybe, I don't know, read two books and they explained it a different way and that's how you kind of
it
figured
was
it
just
out?
by
Or
it was just by pounding away, just by doing things over and over and over again, and
Mhm.
then when things would go wrong, and I wasn't sure why they went wrong, and then I'd have
Mhm.
to work out why they went wrong, and eventually it just came together. It's like pointers, right? It was the same
Mhm.
thing with pointers when I was first learning C, because just not to the same degree.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, I got pointers much more quickly, I think, but I did struggle with that for a while. And I was learning by myself. I didn't have anybody, telling me
Mhm.
uh, this stuff, and but it was just by through doing these things and understanding, when things went wrong, understanding why they went wrong. Eventually,
Mhm.
it just clicked, and I worked out. I think that's what, when you're self-learning, well, even when you're not self-learning, even when you're being taught, I think that's the process, right? You just keep pushing through and pushing through and pushing through, and eventually something clicks,
Mhm.
because you're understanding why things went wrong, and you do it repeatedly. It's the same thing with English
Mhm.
language. When I was teaching English, people would make the same mistakes again and again and again, and they don't get why it's the same mistake. And I keep telling them about the grammar rule or whatever, and eventually they get it. It clicks after so many mistakes. Finally, it clicks, and they don't make it anymore. You know, I guess that's the learning process.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I think about that a lot. I mean, we're both teachers in different ways. So seeing or trying different things and seeing what clicks sometimes works, and sometimes it is like you said, you just gotta pound away with enough repetition, and something kind of rewires in the brain where you're just like, aha, now it clicks.
Yeah, and then there's the fact that everybody learns differently. Yeah, and I envy people who can sit down and read a text and understand it on the first read, and be able to go and there are people like that. I'm not one of them. So
Yeah.
I've got to do again and again and again. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how many years it took me to connect vectors and matrices, but I do remember a few moments where I took a cross product to generate the right vector, and I was like, oh, now I can rotate. Now I kind of get, what these tools are for.
Yeah.
And that was like an aha moment that I still remember and try to recreate for my students in some way through exercises, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so in your journey, you've gone Java, then you did some C programming, and then game programming is kind of where you're drawn to. You're working through the Andre Lamothe books,
Right.
and that's kind of a draw or maybe motivation. Is that how you're kind of spending your time outside of work doing game programming and these types of things at this point?
Yeah, I was obsessed with it. I mean, literally obsessed with it. I mean, it was I was a kid again, basically, because that was my childhood, dream was to make games, and I learned it hadn't died; it had just been dormant, and so now it was awake. And so whenever I was home, I was on my computer working through a book or working through some kind of coding example or working on some project of mine. Um, and my problem though was that I couldn't stay focused on one thing long enough, because I'd try to make a game and I would say, okay, I want to do some kind of physics thing, right? So now I've got to learn some physics stuff, and oh, I want to do this audio thing. So now I got to learn some audio stuff, and I was dividing my attention all over the place, and it was just a long, slow process, but it was a hobby, and it was fun while I was doing it. So I guess that doesn't really matter. Yeah.
Yeah, game programming deceptively hard because there are so many moving pieces, as you mentioned, and it's hard to step back and say, well, maybe I should just make Pong or something, or figuring out what the next step is actually after that is very difficult. I found. I mean, so I do want to talk about some of your other projects in a moment that have lasted many years. So when you talk about jumping around, I think that's interesting that to see which ones. The Derelict project I'm thinking about, which did stick around for a long time. But I do actually want to think about being a self-taught programmer. Do you think you have certain advantages as far as being a self-taught programmer without going through the formal schooling where maybe there could be bad habits, or is it just all kind of a disadvantage and you kind of found yourself racing to catch up? How did you kind of feel?
Well, in my case specifically, I don't think I would have done well in an academic environment learning it. In fact, I did take a programming course at the University of Washington, I think it was, online through Coursera, years later, because I think it was. I think the reason I took that course is because we were getting ranges and standard dot algorithm in D2, which introduced some functional concepts, and I didn't know much about functional programming. So I took this course to learn a little bit about functional programming, and I learned that I don't do well in that environment. The course problems they give you, the homework assignments. That's just I don't that doesn't help me much. So I think I am better suited for independent study, but maybe not completely independent. Maybe it would be nice to have a mentor, a tutor to guide me along the way, because doing it without guidance just made it take much longer than it should have,
Hmm.
because I wasn't disciplined enough. I don't have the discipline to do it. So I think yeah, it's probably going to depend on the person on to whether as to whether it's advantageous or not. Some people thrive in the classroom,
Hmm.
right? But I'm definitely not one of them. I think, at least for programming.
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of folks I tell the same thing for myself, which they're always surprised that I didn't necessarily do very well in school or college. It was graphics and compilers were the two topics that
Mm.
I could pay enough attention to that, I ended up doing well enough to, continue on in a career with those two things. But um, learning some of the theory and the algorithms and proving things in school was just way too, as you said, for me, I didn't thrive. Now I love that stuff, which is just kind of funny, which I don't know if the same has come for you now that you've learned more stuff and now you look at things, you're like, oh yeah, I like that because I could do it at my own pace and I just know more. Is that kind of a similar feeling? I mean, when did you kind of visit some of the, I don't know, computer science topics like data structures and algorithms and
Yeah,
those types of things?
that was much later.
Mm-hmm.
Probably, oh gosh, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years after I started learning.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't interested in them. So, it's funny. I had a conversation with Walter at one of the DConfs, one of the Berlin DConfs. We were sitting at breakfast one morning in the hotel, and um, we were talking about programming. Walter told me that uh, what he really loved about programming was breaking a problem down into many problems,
Mm-hmm.
smaller problems, and solving them all the way back up, right?
Mm-hmm.
To solve the big problem. And I said, see, my brain doesn't work that way, right? I don't enjoy solving problems. Uh, I'm doing it to create something,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not a problem solving activity for me. It's a creative activity.
Mm-hmm.
And um, so for me, the algorithms, the data structures, the nitty gritty details, I don't care about any of that
Mm-hmm.
at all. Which is why it took me so long to work through the 3D stuff, and why it was such a big aha moment when I finally figured it out. Um, but yeah, it was always a more of a creative pursuit for me. And actually, uh, I actually enjoy software architecture,
Mm-hmm.
right? Getting the design of all the packages and the components and everything, and I enjoy that. Writing the code is just a means to an end for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the end itself.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I wonder, speaking about game programming, have you played around with any of these, engines in the last 3D game engines in the last decade, like Unity 3D or Unreal Engine, which kind of do take away some of the, at least initially, the nitty gritty details and allow you to just kind of create something? Have you had any experience with 3D engines?
Well, I haven't touched anything in a long time. The last 3D engine I played around with was the Torque game engine, Garage
Mm-hmm.
Games.
Oh yeah.
I actually bought a license for it, and I never did anything with it. I was just more interested in playing with the default game thing they had with
Mm-hmm.
the editor and everything, and going through the code and seeing what they're
Mm-hmm.
doing and all that. Um, but yeah, and I did play around. There was an Australian, was it RN Jet? I think it was called. It was a
And
Australian game engine.
mm-hmm.
Uh, an Australian company did a game engine. So, yeah, so gosh, Torque, that's been 15 years ago, I think, since the last time I touched that. Now I did get into the Unreal program, whatever that was that they had before they made it completely free or whatever it was. They had some
Mm-hmm.
kind of program. So I did look through the Unreal Engine source code, but I never used it. Yeah,
Yeah,
never used
got it. Yeah, Garage Games and Torque. I've written some Torque script in my day too. That was one of the
Hmm.
good engines. Again, folks these days are so lucky though with like Unity 3D and stuff
Hmm.
because Garage Games was again well ahead of their time, and I think speaking to the indie game scene just before it was about to ignite, as you said, maybe 15 or so years ago.
Yeah.
So I have lots of good memories playing around with probably the same demo, capture the flag scene that they'd give you. And
So the thing that drew me to Garage Games was that the team were the old uh, they were part of uh, I can't remember now the name of their game company, but they were part of Sierra.
yeah,
Their
Tribes
games
2
were
was the game. Yeah.
well, it wasn't Tribes. It was a
Oh.
baseball game they did that got me into them.
Oh.
They had a baseball game
Hmm.
called Front Page Sports. They had
Hmm.
baseball and
Hmm.
football, and I played those games just relentlessly. Right, I loved those games. Um, yeah, and so that's why I followed them when they started Garage Games and started putting that engine out for free. Uh, I wish I could remember the name of the company now, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember because it was, yeah, as I recall, Garage Games. Yeah, they did the Tribes, or that was the Tribes engine, and then and the baseball games, as you
Yeah,
mentioned, and then they
but they
forked off, I guess, or
but they were not Garage Games when they did those games. They
right.
had another company, and I can't remember what the name of the company was, but I think Sierra ultimately bought them out, and
Mm-hmm.
so then they went off and they created Garage Games. Yeah, so
Yeah. Yeah, some good history there. Very cool.
yeah, I would love to get my hands on Front Page Sports games again. That would be so cool.
All right, well, we're putting this out there. Somebody's got to know. Somebody else has to have played who's watching this channel.
Hmm, hopefully.
So let's see. So, thinking about, the gaming stuff, all the way back to Andre Lamoth, and then you mentioned, learning C. And I think a lot of folks, when they talk about Mike and the D community, first off, I want to make sure folks are clear. They mean Mike Parker, because you've been part of that community for a long time. So, what draws you then to the D programming language? When do you start getting involved?
Well, I when I was using C, I never stopped using Java, right?
Mhm.
And I would start something new, this a new little short little dinky game or whatever, and I'd use Java, and then I'd start another one, and I'd use C, and I kept going back and forth because I was never fully satisfied with either of them.
Mhm.
And when I was using C, I missed Java's easy string handling, for example, right?
Mhm.
But then when I was using Java, I missed C structs and being able to manually manage memory and all this stuff. And so
Mhm.
um, it was there were just little frustrations I had when using both languages. And so I was on there was this other game community called Flipcode,
Mhm.
flipcode.com,
Mhm.
and there was this guy on Flip in the Flipcode forums who was just a the ultimate contrarian. Whatever was trendy, he was pushing something else. So at that time in the early 2000s, everybody was OpenGL had kind of had like this wave of popularity, I think, because of the Quake games. But
Mhm.
now everybody in the hobby game communities, everybody was pushing D3D, D3D, D3D,
Mhm.
Windows, D3D. So this guy, he was constantly talking about Linux, constantly talking about OpenGL. And one day he comes in and everybody's saying move off of C, move to C++. And one day he comes in and says, "How about D? You should try D." I'm like, what's D? So
Mhm.
I followed a link to the website, and there was no dling.org at the time. It was just digitalmars.com.
Mhm.
And I go in there, and this is 2003, so summer of 2003, and this website is like 1996, right? And I'm like, maybe not. But I kept thinking about it, right? And he kept talking about it on Flipcode. So a couple months later, I came back and I actually looked at the docs and started looking at some example code, downloaded the compiler, started playing around with it. And I remember the first thing that grabbed me was slices,
Mhm.
right? Of course, at the time we were still calling them dynamic arrays. Dynamic
Mhm.
arrays and slices were two separate concepts. It's the same thing, but it was two separate concepts. But the dynamic arrays, I being able to splice them like that, that was just so cool. And the more I played around with it, the more I realized that this actually solves most of my frustrations with C and Java. It's like Java and C got married and had a baby, and it was D. And so I got hooked pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's one of those things. There are certain features in the D programming language, slices being one. People repeatedly say that once you get used to them, it's hard to use a language without them.
Yes.
You know, it's just so intuitive, and it's easy to express in the language. It's just right there. What piece do you want? So let's see. So help me with the time frame here. Do you remember about what year that was where you start using the D programming language?
Yeah. It was 2003. Yeah.
2003. Okay. So
Yeah.
this is the D1 programming language at this time. Yep.
Yes. And so at that time, the ecosystem basically didn't exist. And this is something I think people take for granted today. You had Walter, he had this little bubble, this little circle of responsibility that he lived in, which was the website, digitalmars.com, the language, the compiler, and the standard library. That was it. The news groups, he didn't maintain the news groups. The news groups were on a server maintained by Jan Nepper, who still maintains the news groups, which, by the way, back the forum software at dlang.org. And so outside of Walter's little bubble, there was just this empty landscape with, well, a barren landscape with the occasional little outpost, where, a binding for some C library or a module that somebody shared on their website. People didn't share libraries, they shared modules, right? They would just upload modules to their website. So to be a D user at that time was to be a D contributor, pretty much. It was a very much a contributor-based community, not a user-based community. And so in early 2004, this guy, Brad Anderson, had been talking to somebody else, and he was able to, they came up with this idea for hosting D projects. And he was able to get his company to donate server space. And they created dsource.org. And dsource provided Subversion repository hosting. You get your own project on there, basically. And the project included Subversion repository hosting, a forum, a project tracker. I think it was Track, TRAC. And I believe that there was a documentation page. I can't remember if it was wiki-based or not. But you had everything you needed for a project. And that was kind of the beginning of the explosion of the ecosystem. The ecosystem really started to grow then. And I signed up pretty early on. I think Derelict was the fourth project, or maybe I think it was sub 10. It was in one of the first 10 projects, I think. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, it was March 2004. I remember that. And I had created Derelict because I wasn't happy with the existing bindings out there. They had a link time dependency, and I wanted something with dynamic loading. So I created Derelict, and I think I had OpenGL and SDL and maybe DevIL, the image library. I think I had those three were the initial bindings I had there. And I created a project on dsource.org. Yeah, and that was my initial contribution to the D community, the D ecosystem.
Yeah, and at that time, I mean, a pretty critical contribution. I mean, people even today are using Derelict. I know they should use the bind BC library would be kind of the evolution. But I have students all the time who stumble upon your library and they just start using it.
Well, Derelict went through, I think, 3 iterations, and bind BC is actually the 4th iteration of Derelict, basically. I scrapped the concept for Derelict and started over because I wanted something that was better C, and because the loader for Derelict used the GC and everything. So I wanted something that avoided all of that. But unfortunately, I'm not maintaining it anymore because I don't have time. I handed it off to somebody else. But yeah, it's hard to believe it's still here all these years later, you know.
Yeah. So, speaking to your, early career in programming where you said you're, juggling a lot of projects and that were sort of short lived. And now you have this one that's, I mean, if you trace it back, it's 20 years old at this point,
Mm.
which is really, really impressive in the software world to maintain something like that.
Well, it was simple. Didn't require a lot of effort. The only effort required was the upfront effort of implementing the bindings because I did it all by hand, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And the thing is, in those days, there were no binding generators. And, those came along later, but I still insisted on doing it by hand. I don't know why. I just felt better doing it by hand. But once you get that upfront stuff out of the way, updating to new versions of the C library is very easy. You just do a diff and
Mm-hmm.
on the headers and implement the new stuff, and you're done. So yeah, it was easy to maintain.
And is that true as well for bind BC? That's all by hand, the bindings or the C interface to the D language?
Well, when I started it, I was doing it by hand, but the current maintainer, she does it. She has a. I think she does everything at compile time now.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's
Okay.
generated at compile time. I haven't looked at it lately, but I know she was talking about changing it to do that.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. And so, now that you've got these bindings, jumping around the timeline a little bit, but in your, initial entry into the D community, you make one of the, again, what I would say a critical project that really kind of makes D easily accessible for people interested in games and graphics. Do you continue your passion doing some game and graphic development? Are you playing around with, using Derelict, I guess, for your own projects, or what's sort of next at this point?
Yeah, that's basically it. I would just come home from work and work on whatever project I was working on at the time. And I didn't finish many of them. There was all just exploratory stuff, just having fun, learning about network programming, learning about, well, not just, I had already learned about network programming, but trying to implement all of it in D, um, learning AI, uh, not not AI as we know it today, but simple game AI, all that stuff, flocking and all that. Whatever it was I was doing, I'd pick up a new book and like, okay, I got to implement some of this stuff. Um, yeah, and I kept telling my wife, yeah, I'll make something out of this eventually. Don't worry, I'm getting there. But yeah, that was it. Just a bunch of throwaway stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Speaking of, I mean, around this time, in the early D ecosystem, there aren't too many books, but around 2008, I believe I've got this book, Learn to Tango with D,
Mm,
that comes out. And you're listed as one of the four authors of this book. So
yes.
I'm curious, how did that start to come about? Was there, did you get together on the news groups and kind of say, hey, let's write a book, or what happened there?
I got invited. What happened was I was running a blog at the time called The One with D,
Mm-hmm.
which there's no trace of it today. I had an archive of it for a long time. I don't know what happened to it. But yeah, I ran that blog for several years, and I was just posting stuff about D news and D projects and interviewing D programmers. But and I had talked to the Tango guys about doing a graphics library for Tango, and I had started researching that, and it was just a lot of work, and it never went anywhere. But because of that connection, they when they were invited by A Press, was it
Mm-hmm.
A Press or a Press? I think it's A
Beats me.
Press. Yeah, yeah. So when they were invited by A Press to do a book about Tango, it was part of their first look series or whatever it's called, the
Mm-hmm.
first something series, and the concept was they published a short book about a language or some other technology, and if it does well, they'll publish a more in-depth book later. Um, and so the Tango guys knew that I did a lot of writing on the blog. So through our connection through the graphics library thing, they asked, "Would you like to join us on this book?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So we each wrote two chapters,
Wow.
and I know I did chapter two, which was the introduction to the basic D language stuff. I think I also did chapter 8, and then I ended up editing also. So, because I was the English teacher. So yeah. So yeah, that was it. They invited me to come along with them, and all the proceeds went to the Tango project. So,
Okay, very
yeah.
cool. And for those who don't know about Tango, because I think a lot of the D users who are watching this have joined since we have Phobos. What was Tango at this time?
Yeah, Tango started out as an alternative to Phobos. It was a merging of two separate projects. There was this project called Ares on DSource, which was kind of like a runtime for D, and then there was this project called Mango, which was a Java-like library that had things like servlets and I think streams and all kinds of other stuff. And so they took parts of Tango. They didn't use the servlets, but they Mango. They took parts of Mango, and they took Ares and put them together into Tango. And yeah, that was put forth as an alternative standard library. And they wanted to make it the official standard library because I think the reason it came about is because it was very Java-like. It was object-oriented, and the D standard library, the official library Phobos, was very flat. It's a C API basically, and you had two camps: the camps that wanted the camp that wanted the C API, the C style API, the camp that wanted the object oriented API, and that caused a bit of a split in the D community for a while. And that was resolved basically at the precursor to DConf, the 2007 D programming language conference, which was hosted at Amazon. And the Tango guys met with Walter and Andre, and the ultimate result was that the what started out as Ares and had become the Tango runtime essentially became D runtime.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is if you have just this independent runtime, then you could have a standard library on top of that. Phobos and Tango could both sit on top of that common runtime. And so anyway, that's how we have D runtime today. And so for a while there, you had D2 that was just getting underway using D runtime and Phobos, and people sticking with D1 to use Tango. And that's basically how it was for a couple of years there. But eventually, everything settled on Phobos.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. So, yeah, you've got all the history here, and I think what's kind of interesting. I didn't actually know about your previous blog, One with D. I would have loved to find that before this, if it existed.
Yeah.
But I did find some of your blog articles on gamedev.net. So after you had learned to Tango with D, I noticed there were you started writing lots of nice again game development posts there, sharing some of your projects, talking about the bindings. How did those sort of come about? Were these just again things that you were doing in your spare time and continuing the game development?
Yeah, so I had been, like I said earlier, I'd been in the gamedev.net community since the late 90s and since they first started up. And it was around this time, gosh, what was that, 2012, 2013, something like that. It was around that time when shortly before that, I guess, they had introduced a blog system on their website. And at that point, I did not have the One with D anymore because somehow I gotten my site had gotten compromised, and I wasn't sure what it was. I was using a shared hosting, and I had taken it offline, and I never got it back online again. And I felt like I should be writing about D again. I should be evangelizing it, right? And so I just started writing some D articles on the GameDev.net blog. That's all that was. I was just missing my blog. And GameDev had a blog that I didn't have to host myself, so I started writing there. Yeah.
Yeah, and those articles are still quite good, and I've read through some of the ones on binding to C libraries with D. But I think I also picked up that those might have been influential for the book that you would eventually write as a solo author here. Is that true, or how did writing the book. And let me, for the audience here, I made sure I had my copy here. Learning D. How did this book come about? Because this is a really nice, thick book here that's going to teach you a lot of, D2 today that I recommend to folks.
Well, I got an email out of the blue from Pact, one of the editors at Pact, and they said, "We know that you were a co-author of Learn to Tango with D, and we know that you have done this and this. Would you be interested in writing a book about D?" And I'm like, "Okay, sure." And yeah, it wasn't my idea. It was their idea, and I had never written a complete book by myself, and I had never written anything to such a tight deadline, and I didn't realize what I was getting into when I did that. And I had recently opened a hot dog shop,
Mm-hmm.
so I was in the hot dog shop during the day, during the slow hours. I'd sit there with my laptop and work on the book until customers came in. And when I got home, I'd work on the book some more. Uh, and it was, I think it was about, I think we started that in January or February. And I think I got the final draft in around November
Wow.
or October, somewhere around there. So it was relatively short time period for the amount of.
Wow, so that was well under a year for a full. I mean, this is a 300. What is this? A 400-page book, nearly.
Yeah,
420 plus pages here. So that's quite impressive here.
yeah, and I thought, oh, it's only 10 chapters. I'll be able to knock this out. Yeah, right. And the thing is, I had this. I was doing. I can't remember the details now, but I ended up having to rewrite a good chunk of it about halfway through because I switched gears with the example
Mm.
code I was using, the example project. I can't remember the details now, but I did have to rewrite, I think, the first 3 chapters or something, which was, oh, yeah, that was a stressful experience. And I'm not sure I would want to do it again.
All right. I was gonna try to get it an exclusive, wins edition two coming.
if
Hot take here.
if if I ever do write another D book, it's going to be self-published. It's going to be free. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
be pay what you want, maybe, but it's going to be written at my own pace.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to work with a publisher again. But I would have no objection to writing another D book again.
Yeah, I mean, this book again, I'm gonna recommend it to folks because it's very, very well written. I mean, and it's interesting to hear that you're writing this in between, hours, downtime, effectively that you had. When I talked to Ollie Trelli, who's written the programming in D book, he said he wrote a lot of his on the way from Caltrain, commuting to work
Mm.
back and forth. So sometimes that's how that stuff gets done, right? A little bit over a long time, or in your case, a lot in a short time. It really does add up here. I mean, I'm kind of curious your experience, teaching English and being a writer, right, with the blogs and so on. Was that, I mean, because you write very well and very clearly, was that very helpful? I mean, do you have a process when you're writing a book and just how you outline or draft or go about a process like this? Because again, these are huge projects.
I'm mostly what they call a pantser.
Hmm.
Have you heard that before?
I've never heard this term. No.
I write by the seat of my pants. Um, I I I generally don't do much outlining. Now, for the book, I had to have at least a skeleton outline for the publisher.
Hmm.
But uh, I kind of, and I know the points I want to cover,
Hmm.
um, but I'm not always clear how to get there until I start actually writing.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't have a detailed outline. Some people will basically have most of a chapter written in note form in their
Hmm.
outline before they ever open the editor, right? But
Hmm.
I'm not like that. If I do any outlining at all, it's just the chapter titles and maybe the main headings, and that's it.
Mhm.
But often the main headings don't survive
Mm.
because I'll change my mind as I go along.
That's fascinating because your text is very conversational. I mean, it feels like I'm reading with you, and maybe that's the advantage of not having this sort of jumping bullet to bullet in an outline. I mean, it feels like you're taking me wherever you want to go, and I'm just along for the ride, which is kind of nice. I'm not skipping steps.
Yeah,
Um,
I well, for me, it's kind of like, the YouTube videos that I do. I don't script my YouTube videos, right?
mhm,
I have, if I'm doing something where I've got to have a set of facts because I'm talking about history or something, then I will have some bullet points on my Apple Notes or whatever. But uh, I just know the points I want to cover. I know where I want to start and where I want to end up. But how I get there, I discover it along the way. And so I think because for the videos, I feel like if I'm scripted, I'm going to sound scripted.
mhm, mhm.
And I feel like for a book, if I have a detailed outline, I'm going to sound like I'm lecturing as I
Mhm.
write. And I don't want to be lecturing. Yeah. So I think that's pretty important for me anyway.
Yeah, I think it comes off very well. And again, I recommend folks to check out the Mike and Korea videos because they are very fun. And as you said, you're not being lectured history or any of these things. It is it's very very entertaining, but you're learning along the way, which is it's been fascinating for me just to watch some of your videos and hear how things are pronounced and culturally how things have evolved in certain regions and so on. So fascinating.
That's cool to hear. Really cool to hear. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So so you've written at this point or been a part of two book projects. One, self single authored, and then there's this also what I would call a huge project. I mean, just from my academic background, but there's this history of programming languages or HOPL paper. And for those who don't know, this is a very prestigious conference. It's co-hosted with the Programming Language Design and Implementation (PLDI) conference, where a lot of the great systems and programming language work is done. These HOPL papers come out. I think it's is it every 10 years or every 4 years?
Yeah, it's
Uh,
it's a long gap. I don't know exactly how many years it is. It's not four. It's more than that. Yeah.
yeah, so I think it's at least 10. So it's more, you know, more of a gap than the Olympics for sure. And sort of the best of the best programming language history gets here. And you, Andre Alexandrescu, and Walter authored a paper that was accepted there. What was that process? How did you work on that paper? Covering the history or the origins of the deprogramming language.
So again, this was a project I was invited into. Walter and Andre had already uh, gotten started on it. I don't know how that got started, how they got into the conference. Uh, that's interesting. I've never asked them about it. It just occurred to me. Um, but Andre emailed me. Now, at that point, I was already working with the D Foundation. They hired me. I started working as a volunteer in 2016, and they hired me in 2017. I was working part time. When they hired me on, I was getting $900 a month for 10 hours a week, right? And then they kept piling more stuff on top of me to do. Um, so one day, Andre emails me and says, "Hey, we've got this paper going on. You've written some D books. You've done the blog. We want you to join us on this." And I'm like, eh. So uh, it was LaTeX. I've never used it before then. I knew of it and had seen it and didn't want anything to do with it, but had to use it for that. But basically, we had Walter's notes, and we had a draft, I think, that Andre, or sections of a draft that Andre had written. And I think what we did initially, I came in and I redrafted it. I mean, we kept the structure, we kept the majority of the text. I just kind of uh, it was just a second draft. It was just a revision, I guess, is what I did with it. And our what do they call it? Shepherd, I guess. the mentor who got you through, the shepherd who got you through the
Yeah.
process was Roberto Ayerleskami of Lua.
Hmm. Oh yeah.
And so when we finished that draft and we submitted, it was the initial draft to officially submit, and it got reviewed. And the rec did he review it? Wait, was that reviewed? Okay, I don't remember the process. I just remember him coming back and saying, "This is too academic. It's too dry, and try to do something different with it."
Mm.
And so Andre and Walter just gave it to me. They say, "Here, do something with it." And so I basically rewrote it
Mhm.
and made it into a story,
Mhm.
basically, because some of my favorite history books are the kind that tell history as a story. I'm
Mhm.
not talking about historical fiction, but I'm talking about history writers who write a history like it's a story.
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to think, okay, I'm sitting at a campfire and I'm telling you the origins of the deprogramming language.
Mhm.
And so that's what the result was. And Roberto liked that, and the reviewers liked it, so we went with it. Yeah.
What a great way to frame, a writing process, thinking like you're sitting by a campfire. I love that because, right, humans are storytellers. I mean, that's why,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a lot of us get so much out of reading or watching movies, right, to sort of escape and have that feeling. Um, I would have loved to read the first draft of the one that was way too technical, just to kind of compare and contrast. Because I can tell you, I saw the tweet of when this paper came out in, I think, probably 2021. I think because it was maybe delayed by COVID. I don't remember. Yeah.
Yeah, the,
But
the, the project, the conference was supposed to be in London in
mm,
2020, and so it got canceled, of course, and they ended up doing it online. And because of that, Andre and I weren't able to participate. They had this rules about who could do the
mm,
talk or whatever. So anyway, Walter did the presentation.
yeah, well, would have loved to. Oh, kind of a bummer to do all the work and not get to travel.
Yeah, well, that's life. Yeah.
That is life sometimes. But again, I could tell you about the paper for those who haven't read it. It is, I mean, I read it in one sitting, and it's a long paper, but it goes through the how, for the deep programming language came about, the whys as far as some of the design decisions, and what is D. So it's an excellent reading of the history. So you've really put your touch on it, Mike, as a writer.
Well, what kills me is that after it was reviewed, we had to do another draft of it, the final draft, and for some reason we got delayed. I don't remember what it was, and so I ended up writing right up against the deadline,
Mm,
right, to get it
mm.
in. And so now when I read it, there are certain errors in there, and I'm like, oh, you know, typos or whatever. I'm like, oh, but yeah, I it was a fun process. It was a fun process.
Yeah, I mean, really, really a great paper. I try to get my students to read it. The ones who are excited about
Mm-hmm.
D, especially, because sometimes they are, have questions about why.
Mm-hmm.
um, so we've touched on this a tiny bit, or it's popped up. Uh, your involvement with the D Language Foundation and various responsibilities, such as organizing DConf.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about maybe when did you start attending D conference, and then where was the shift where now you're the guy organizing it?
Right. So my first DConf was 2013, the first DConf. I do not count the 2007 conference as DConf. It wasn't branded that way. 2013 was the first DConf at the Facebook campus
Mm-hmm.
in San Jose. Well, wherever it is. Um, Menlo Park. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
And I just happened to be in the States at the time,
Mm-hmm.
visiting home in Atlanta. And on my way back to Korea, I dropped by the conference and hung out there. And it was a great experience because I had never met any of these people in real life before. They were people I knew. Many of them were people I knew online, had interacted with online, and being able to hang out with them in person was just amazing. I couldn't even tell you what the talks were about. I'd have to go back and look at the website to tell you what the talks were about. But I remember specific conversations I had with people at different times. Like I remember sitting in the Aloft Hotel talking with Adam Wilson about a potential graphics library for D, and different details about line caps and pixel borders and whatever, I remember chatting with Sean. Uh, I can't remember his last name. He's one of the Tango guys. He wrote D Runtime and Ares. Um, but I remember, chatting with him about video games and all kinds of stuff. So it was a great experience. And I did not attend 2014 or 2015. They were both in the States, and I wasn't able to get back there that time. But I was bound and determined to go to 2016. And especially when I found out it was going to be in Berlin. But my mission for 2016 was to get Andre and Walter to convince them to start an official blog. Mm-hmm. So I think I pushed that on them the night before the conference started. We were all in the lobby of the Ibis Hotel, and I'm pretty sure I brought it up there. And Andre did his little skeptical face, and they didn't seem too enthused about it. But I think it was a couple nights later in the lobby again during DConf, which we didn't have that name yet. But Andre pulled me aside. He's like, "Tell me about this blog idea." And we got to talking about it. And he says, "Well, if I can get Jan Nepper to set up a WordPress instance, would you be willing to manage the blog?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I started doing that. And a few months later, they liked it. They liked what I was doing with it. So they offered to start paying me per blog post. So they started doing that. And then by the end of the year, Andre says, "Look, why don't we want to offer you a job with the foundation. We can't pay you much. It'll only be 10 hours a week. But basically, you'll continue managing the blog and doing things that we don't have time for, or in other words, things that they don't want to do." So that's how it started. And so January 2017 is when they started paying me. And so that meant that I was involved peripherally in DConf planning. Basically, I was just doing some admin stuff. They sending confirmation emails when people registered, emailing past attendees to offer them a discount to attend again. This kind of thing. I wasn't involved in the planning, but they did bring me in for talk selection, which was fun. It was me, Walter, Andre, and Ali, and we did it online via secret ballot on Google Sheets. I think we had different tabs on there. And then just every year, gradually, I just took on more responsibility until I think 2022 was the first time. 2019 was the first. In 2019, I was kind of like the contact for the D Language Foundation. So everything that when Symmetry was their first time hosting, and they had a woman, Belinda, who was there. She was overseeing the planning, and so she and I interacted on that. But she did most of the heavy lifting, all the heavy lifting. I just basically answered questions. But I think 2022 was the first time where I was actually doing the organizing, answering, making the decisions and all that. Prior to that, like in 2019, I'd say, Belinda would ask me a question, and if it was something I felt was above my pay grade, I'd ask Walter and Andre, "What do you guys think about this?" I don't have to do that anymore. So, yeah, that's how it happened. It was just a gradual evolution of more and more responsibility.
Wow. So my first DConf was 2022. So that's when you sort of took over, and you also had the responsibility that DConference of giving a talk as well as running the conference. So that must have been a lot running around. but it was a wonderful talk. It's titled, "It Takes a Village." Can you tell the audience just a little bit about what's in that talk? I guess from 2022.
Well, the motivation for that talk was that I had noticed a change in the D community in terms of how they perceived the D Foundation. I think earlier I talked about the early days where you had Walter in a little bubble and you had this empty space around him, this empty landscape. And I mentioned DSource. DSource was kind of the first critical infrastructure project in the D community. And if there was a problem with DSource, if it went down or whatever, nobody would have thought Walter's responsible for that. Everybody knew Brad Anderson was responsible for DSource, right? And so over the subsequent years, we had many projects pop up like that became either some kind of critical ecosystem projects or critical infrastructure, or just things that people said, oh, the D language, or before the D language project, Walter and Andre should make this the official D something, the official D GUI, the official D IDE plugin, right? Like Visual D, right? Everything that happened in the D ecosystem happened because somebody in the community made it happen. Walter and Andre had no hand in that. They didn't sit down and say, we need this, we need this. I mean, sometimes a need for something would arise, and they would say, oh, is there anybody who would be willing to do this, right? But most of the time it was people just stepping up and filling gaps in the ecosystem. When we moved to GitHub, that was a community idea. When we got dlang.org instead of digitalmars.com, that came from the community. Many of the pages on the website came from a good one that I can think of right now, the orgs using D page. That was created by the community, maintained by the community, right? Andre and Walter still had this little bubble where their defined responsibilities, and everything else outside of that was a community-driven, community-created, community-maintained environment. And even as late as 2016, right, the foundation was incorporated in 2015. And so you go back and you look at Andre's keynote from DConf 2016. I think it's the second or third slide in his talk. The title is The First 5 Minutes. And he has this list of things like the website and some other stuff, talking about how we need to make the experience better for for people coming in to the first time. The first 5 minutes is the first 5 years, I think was the phrase. And the very next slide, he talks about points of contact and czars, right? And as an example, I think of points of contact, he talks about Vladimir Panteleev and says, if there's a problem with the website, I can go to Vladimir. And Vladimir is not responsible for the website, but he knows who can fix it. And he'll talk to whoever he needs to talk to get it done. And then he talks about the czars, and I think he mentions like Martin Novak, who created the compiler build system, right? He just came out of the blue, came out of nowhere with this build system, and became the build czar. He also became the release czar. The release system we use today, the release process, was something he initiated and evolved over the years. So every part of our ecosystem and infrastructure, the CI, all of it, the website, all of it was community driven. And everybody knew it. You had Walter and Andre, even after the D Foundation, in their bubble with their responsibilities, and the community was outside of it, responsible for everything else. And that was as late as 2016. But then you fast forward 5 years, and I noticed there was a massive change in perspective, in attitude. And I think the best way I can describe it now is that that bubble doesn't exist anymore. Instead, now we've got this line going through the environment. And on one side of it, you got all the critical infrastructure and the important stuff, and the D Foundation. And on the other side of it, you've got the community and the third party stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everything on that side of the line with the D Foundation is the D Foundation's responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so what had happened is this shift had come about, this shift in perspective. And I think those of us on the core team, we didn't realize it. Mm-hmm. We're still thinking in terms of this bubble, right? Oh, the forums are down. I got to ping Vladimir. He's responsible for the forums. Oh, the dub registry is down. I got to ping Zonka. He's responsible for that. Reiner needs to do something about Visual D, right? Mm-hmm. Now, but the community is saying, oh, the forum's down. The D Foundation needs to do something about this, right? Mm-hmm. We were now responsible for all of this stuff. And we didn't even realize we had become responsible for it. Even that orgs using D page. Nobody was maintaining it anymore. And there were orgs on there who were no longer using D, and nobody had updated it. It had never entered my mind that we needed to update that. So, I saw the nature of and the tenor of the criticisms and complaints had changed. And when I had this realization that we were now responsible for all this stuff that we hadn't thought ourselves responsible for, that explained a lot of the differences in expectations that the community had, and because we were frustrated at some point with some of the feedback we were getting. We couldn't understand it, right? But now at that point it all started to make sense, and so that's what motivated my talk. And so in the talk, what I wanted to do, I wanted to show how the D community, the D ecosystem had evolved, how the community had built it, and imply that the expectations had changed over time. And I just wanted to make sure people were aware of that, that, nobody, the D Language Foundation didn't plan any of this. We didn't create it. It was the community that built it. And without the community, none of it would be here. So yeah, we'll take responsibility for it now, but we still need help, right? We're no longer a contributor base. We now have a user base. We went from this contributor base to kind of this mixed thing, and now it's mostly a user base. We don't have people jumping up to be czars of anything anymore. And it's a completely different world now. So right now we're trying to adapt to that. Yeah, but that's what the talk was about.
Yeah, that's a really great talk and really great. The analogy that comes to mind is when I think of like a small startup company, few folks in a garage, starting something, and then all of a sudden, like you said, now you have hundreds, thousands, millions, however many of users at any given point. And you have some sort of we have the D Language Foundation, I guess, which most people, and including myself, when I kind of got active in the community, it just came to me as sort of, oh, this is a known thing, like D Language Foundation, and there's this core team of folks who are working on things. So it is very interesting. Does that also in some ways speak to the success of the D programming language just over time, that it's now, the core team's not just Walter and Andre, for instance. It's, a number of people who work on the compiler, multiple compilers at this point. And, there's actually people getting paid to do work on the language, which some might view as a very, kind of critical thing to just see that. Can you kind of speak to the community and where D is now as, foundation? Like, does it feel, contrasting with, say, 2004, 20 years ago, more official, more healthy, more mature? How would you sort of describe it, I guess?
Yeah, I think it does feel more mature, definitely more mature. The fact that we now have a user base versus a contributor base is a big deal, right? And I think that's an absolutely positive thing. Where we're deficient right now is in resources, right? So we always need more funding. We always need more people. We always need more time, right? Walter is the only one working full time, right? I'm not full time. I'm still part time, and Razvan is part time. Dennis is part time. Now I say that, and we often work more hours than we're supposed to, right? More hours than we're paid for, just because if we don't, we'll fall further behind, right? But what our challenge is now that we've recognized that we've had this realization that we own all of this stuff now, we've got to adapt our processes to be more efficient in managing all of it. Mm-hmm. So I think this has been one of the biggest blockers for us, is that we were in that mindset before of having all these different volunteers. So it was preventing us from recognizing what we needed to do to adjust to this new situation, right? To this user base. So we're getting there. So the UCORA's organizational redevelopment program, the Ivy thing, that helped us in many ways. The great thing about Ivy is that it's not something, it's not like a set of defined steps you have to follow. You just adapt it into your processes as you see fit. And we've adapted it, and it's helped us in decision making. And it's because of that we've expanded the team, actually. Mm-hmm. You know, in recent months, we brought on Steven Schweighofer, Tim Benger, Ricky Cattermole, Adam Wilson, Jonathan Davis. We've got all these people now, part of the monthly meetings, part of the core team, and they're doing actual work that wasn't getting done before, right? Which is huge. And so now we just need to get better at execution. And that's something that Razvan is going to be helping us with now. He's going to moving away from being a PR and issue manager to being the project coordinator to make sure things get done, to make sure we follow through. And we need to get better at communication, not just externally, but internally. So, you know, it's just that now we're able to better see that we, you know, what we need to do to adapt to this user base that we have now. And I'm confident because this year we got more funding than we did in the past. It was limited because I asked for a limited scope, but in 2025 I'm hoping to get more. I have some proposals that are about to go out, and I think that's going to help us if we're able to get it to do some of the things that we want to do. So yeah, I'm optimistic for the future. Additions are going to help us fix some broken spots in the language, hopefully. And I feel like this is kind of a new era now, right? We went from that early adopter era, what I called settlers in my talk, and then we went to the village, and then we went to the town, and I think we're getting ready to move into the city now. The growing city.
Yeah, I think it's a very exciting thing. I mean, what would you say to folks who, and this is a sentiment that sometimes you read online, you know, folks who are trying to maybe investigate D for the first time. They'll say, oh, you know, what's the D programming language? I'll see this even on my YouTube. And then folks will say, oh, that was a language from, you know, 20 years ago. That's a new C++ or something. And I think we both know that things have evolved a lot, and D is sort of in the best, or maybe this is my opinion. I'll share that you know it's a language, as you said, I'm very excited about, and it's growing. But I mean, what do you say to folks who are new and maybe want to try out D versus, and I don't care about popularity contests. People can use whatever language they want, but what do you say to someone who says, oh, what's the D programming language? Why should I try this versus language, I don't know, X, Y, and Z? Or, you know, what would you say to new folks?
Yeah, well, to anybody who's in a position to choose their language, it's fun. D is the only programming language I've ever used that I can say that about. Java is not fun. C is not fun. C is definitely not fun. C++ is not fun. D is fun. I enjoy programming when I program with D, and and you know, my problem is I'm biased by my background, right? I have that C knowledge behind me and that Java knowledge behind me together, and so the way I see D is I can express things in D naturally, right? D fits the way I think. So I don't know if I would want to say that to other people. It might not fit the way they think, but it definitely fits the way I think. And I'm sure that they will find something about it that they like. Yeah. So yeah, it's fun. That's what I would tell them. And another thing I would tell them is that you'll find a lot of familiar stuff in D if you have a background in any of the C style languages. It's not going to feel alien. It's might even feel you might even feel at home once you try it.
That's a similar sentiment. I asked Ali similar question. He said it's fun. He looks forward to programming. And I'll echo that as well. I never, feel bad about writing decode or that I'm wrestling with a language. And again, some of that, again, people are going to have different preferences, of course, for these things, but I feel the same way. So it's very, very interesting to hear that echoed, a few times by folks that I know have been programming for a while. So very cool. So, I mean, this has been a fascinating, history leading up to basically now where we're at in the D programming language. And you've been doing a lot of community conversations. Again, like we said, we've kind of flipped the tables on you here and gotten to hear your story. But you've also been doing some other YouTube stuff, which I'm just curious about as far as, your process, the series Mike in Korea here. So tell me, when does this start? Is this something you thought of while you were doing videos for the D language foundation and just kind of enjoyed the process of doing YouTube, and you said, hey, I've got this other thing that I want to try? Where does this come about?
Well, this actually goes back years. I had I've long had this compulsion to tell people about Korea. It's kind of the same compulsion I had to tell people about the D language when I first started using it, right? And it's only gotten stronger over time because there's a lot of interest in Korea these days. Back a long time ago, people didn't know anything about Korea. And I would talk to people online, tell them I lived in Korea. They're like, where, North Korea? Of course not. And my father, when he came here, we were on a bus from the airport, and he was looking out the window the whole time. This was 2005, and he didn't say a word the whole time we were on the bus from Incheon Airport. And we got off the bus, and I said, "You were really quiet. What's up with that?" He's like, "You've been trying to tell me for years, son, and I just thought it was MASH." You remember MASH, the TV show?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, he had this vision of this poor backwards country. So today, I think because of K-pop and K-dramas, there's this different interest in Korea now and a lot of knowledge about Korea. But I still feel like there's more than K-pop. There's more than K-dramas, and I just feel compelled to share my side of Korea, how I see it and experience it. So I thought about blogging, and it didn't seem like the right format. I thought about writing a book, and no thanks. And so for years, I just didn't do anything about it. But then I started managing the foundation's YouTube channel in 2018 was the first, when we first started it, I think. And in 2020, during the pandemic, I saw somebody doing walking tours in London. And I thought, hey, I should do that in Seoul. So I did. I started a channel doing walking tours, and I ran that for about 3 years. And the whole time I'm thinking, maybe I should publish some videos here talking about some of the places I'm seeing. But you get this thing where, well, my user base is, I don't have like 500 subscribers or something. But I'm thinking, okay, the vlogging about history or whatever wouldn't really fit here. I should probably start a new channel. So I started planning for it. So I I started planning for it, I think, in early 2023. And as the year went on, I started buying new equipment because I had enough experience now with like DaVinci Resolve and all this other stuff. I knew I didn't want to use my iPhone. I wanted a camera. I wanted an action camera with the wide field of view. Um, so I had everything in my head. I bought a Mac Studio. I bought an Osmo Action 4. I bought some DJI mics, and I got everything ready and just jumped into it. The hard part was actually what I thought was going to be easy, and that was talking to the camera.
Mm.
When my wife and I went to London for DConf last year in 2023, I took the camera with me, and I kept trying to. I was just experimenting, right? And I was so awkward, and just it was incredibly weird doing that. But eventually I got used to it. So I think I started in November of last year. I don't think, I know. I started in November of 2023. And I just jumped in and broke my toe the very next day the day after I published my first video. The whole concept of my channel was going to be walking and talking, and I broke my toe. So yeah. But yeah, that's the whole point, is just talking about Korea from my perspective. And so that doesn't lock me into just history or whatever. I can talk about anything I'm interested in.
Yeah, that's really excellent. To hear about what you're working on. And one thing I will mention is it's quite clear that the quality of your recordings is excellent. I mean, your tech stack, so to speak. Your videos are really, really sharp and good audio, and I wouldn't know as somebody just listening that you were just getting used to this. It seems like you've been doing this for years. Again, just as a storyteller, so it all seems natural to me. So
thanks. That's really what I want, to seem natural. I don't want to be awkward or forced. So I got being in the classroom has something to do with it, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I mean, I look back at some of my early videos. I've been at YouTube about 3, maybe 4 years at this point, and some of my early ones I'm much less natural. It's always a process. So I mean, you got the hang of things pretty quick. I mean, you had well over 1,000 subscribers, I mean, pretty fast, as I recall, and your channel continues to grow there.
Yeah, I got lucky with a couple of videos that had a nice spike in views and brought in some subscribers. So I think it was in May. It was April, my first Q&A. I've noticed that anytime I put like 30 years or 33 years in the title, I've been in Korea 33 years, right? So 33 years in Korea Q&A, that brings in more viewers. So anytime I want to hit viewers, I add that number in the title. Normally, I'm not thinking about that, right? But I'm targeting my return viewers usually. But yeah, and then my recent one where I was walking through Seoul at 3 a.m., that one just exploded, and I don't know why. That was wild. So,
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna ask you that's one that's surprised you as far as how well it's been received. Are there others, or are there moments just kind of in the YouTube journey that have surprised you?
well, I was surprised to hit 1,000 subscribers so soon. My goal in my mind when I set out, if I don't reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, then I'm not going to be able to prioritize this anymore. I've got to have some milestones that I meet to keep making it a priority. And so I was happy to be able to hit that. And the night walk, I really don't understand what caused that to blow up. I didn't spend any time on the title. If I wanted to spend time on the title, it would have been something. Is Seoul safe at 3 a.m.? How safe is Seoul really? That kind of thing. But the most surprising thing, though, I think, has been the emails. People have emailed me. I put out an email address. I started. I got my own domain, mikefromkorea.com, and I set up a Q&A at mikefromkorea.com. And so when I asked people to send me questions, they email me there. But then people started sending their stories, not questions, but stories about uh, oh, I was a soldier in Korea back in 1985 and blah 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 blah. And I have had so many stories from people. I've had
Mhm.
people email me wanted to meet up while they're here in
Mhm.
Korea for a cup of coffee. I've had people donations coming in through Kofi.com. I set that up as just kind of a might as well
Mhm.
can't hurt to set it up, and people actually donate. People are actually supporting me. And one of the guys who supports me, he's in his 70s, and he and his wife are. His wife's Korean, and they visited Korea right before I went to the UK. The
Mhm.
day before I flew out, I met up with them
Mhm.
at their hotel, and we walked around the city together. And he gave me a backpack full of stuff from the states, pecans from Georgia. I'm from Georgia. He lives in Tennessee.
Mhm.
Uh, and just a really good bottle of tequila, a gift for my wife, a gift for my mother-in-law. It just blows my mind
Mhm.
that this kind of thing can happen. So yeah, that's probably been the biggest surprise. Is just the interactions I've had with people, and I occasionally run into people on the street. So it already happens. It's happened a few times now. I'll be walking along, and somebody was like, "Mike from Korea." Oh, hi. It's like, wow. And we'll sit and chat, and that's a lot of fun. So yeah.
Wow, that's really awesome to hear. I mean, that's what one speaks to, just having a really, genuine channel, but to hear about the experiences and people how they connected. I mean, it's what I feel the internet, at its best is supposed to be
Mm-hmm.
used for, right? Connecting us and sharing stories, as you
Mm-hmm.
said. So that's quite incredible to hear.
Yeah, and I've been meeting other YouTubers here in Korea,
Hmm.
and we've been hanging out and chatting, and so that's it's also been fun. I want to set up like a quarterly meeting with some
Hmm.
of us, just for the heck of it. So I've already got one of them on board. I haven't talked to the others yet, but that's going to be fun. But yeah, this is just a whole new world. It's like when I first came into the D community, right? It
Hmm.
was amazing having programmers I could talk to
Hmm.
about my favorite programming language in real life when I
Hmm.
would go to the conference, or when like Matthias Long, he came here to Korea to work for a while, and he and I could hang out and chat about D. I could
Hmm.
chat about D with people in his office. It was awesome. It was the first time I had people here in Korea I could talk about programming with, right?
Hmm.
And so now that I'm really into YouTube, having these people around me I can talk about YouTube with is really great.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Yeah. Um, I mean, this must be the most common question you get about, from your commenters. But how many miles or kilometers are you walking on average in one of your videos?
I really don't know. Really don't know. Uh, Yeah, actually, when I do my videos, I'm probably putting in over 15,000, somewhere between 15,000 and 20 steps, just because I end up walking back and forth a lot
Mhm.
for multiple takes sometimes,
Sure.
right? That kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know how many kilometers I'm putting in, but I walk every day, so that's yeah. Adding the videos to it isn't any burden. Yeah.
That's excellent. And as you alluded to, there was some connection with the D community at some point where there was maybe a small D language meetup in South Korea as well. Was that something that was going to come to fruition, or?
Well,
Um,
we did it a couple of times. Matthias was here working for a company as a deprogrammer
mhm.
for their project, and they let us use their space a couple of times
Mhm.
to set up a meetup. But um, well, the initial meetups we did were much smaller.
Mhm.
It was me and Matthias, and I don't know if you remember Mike Franklin.
I don't know if I've met Mike. I've seen his name on the forums,
Yeah,
probably. Yeah.
well, he was here in Korea, and
Oh.
it's interesting because his GitHub handle was a Korean word, and I noticed that one day. I was like, "Is he in Korea?" And then I reached out to him and I found out he is in Korea. So we started doing these meetups with me and Mike and Matthias and whoever else was around at the time. There would sometimes be other people like the Korea Advanced Institutes of Science and Technology had a couple of deprogrammers there working with a university in Australia. And another member of the D community who was working with Matthias, Dre, he was here for a little while. So we would meet up. And a couple of times we tried to do bigger meetups to get more people in, but we had people from so many backgrounds who knew absolutely nothing about D. And, it's like one time I had this whole presentation prepared about D, assuming that my audience had a C background. And every one of them were JavaScript, TypeScript, no C background. So I had to adapt the talk on the fly for these guys and taught them some very, very basic D. So that never went very far. Basically, the D meetups we had were just me, Matthias, and the others just sitting around drinking beer.
It sounds like a good time, though.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was fun while it lasted. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Well, let's see. You've given us, a generous portion of your time, and I know it's late there. But I do want to kind of go through a rapid fire, series of questions here to round us off here.
Okay.
So maybe starting from the top here, do you have a favorite programming book, video, or article that you've read that you think every other programmer should read?
Probably Crafting Interpreters. What's his name? Robert Nystrom? Was that his name?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. I haven't actually implemented anything in the book, but I read through it. I read through it. I think that is something, it's a skill that every programmer should have. Really. Even if you never write a scripting language, you never write your own programming language, knowing how to write a parser and all of that stuff, it's a really useful skill. And it's an entertaining book. I think it's well written.
Yeah, and he's put it up for free online. Is that where you were able to find it, or do you have a hard copy?
No, I think I have the Kindle version, actually. Yeah.
Excellent. Let's see. Advice to young programmers just getting started. Any words of advice to them?
Turn around, run away. No, my advice to young programmers just getting started is to don't ignore the fundamentals. Don't ignore the fundamentals. Learn to crawl. Get yourself some books on computer architecture. Get yourself some books on the common algorithms, the standard algorithms. It doesn't even have to be one of the academic texts like, what is it, Corman or whatever. I think I've lost you again. There you are. Okay.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
Isn't it Corman? Isn't
Yeah, there's the CLRS one. Yeah, algorithms. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be that. It can be one of the easier, bite-sized books of algorithms. Get yourself some algorithms. Get the fundamentals. Yeah.
Excellent. Favorite game?
Of all time or right now?
That came to mind. First thing that came to mind.
Fortnite, because it's the only game I play anymore because I don't have time for anything else. So I play with 2 or 3 friends. We get together several times a week for an hour session or whatever if we have time. Yeah. But all time, Elder Scrolls Online, fantastic game. Just there's no time. There's no time for it.
I hear you. Let's see. This might have already been answered, but first time you saw something on a computer and you just went, "Wow."
Yeah, well, that obviously was Space Invaders, but I can give you a better one, a bigger wow, and that was Wolfenstein.
Of course.
Because I was, and I'll tell you, I was in the Army. I was working in an emergency room in a hospital here in Korea. I was working the night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And after our rush would die down, I'd sometimes wander over to X-Ray to hang out with the guy on the night shift over there and chat. And one night I went over there and he was playing Wolfenstein on the computer in the X-Ray department. And I was just like, what the hell is this? This is awesome. And that's one of those moments that stays with you, you know. It was amazing. I'd never seen anything like it.
I was gonna say, and Wolfenstein's also aged very well. It's still fun to play.
Oh yeah, I haven't played it in a while, but I can imagine it is. Yeah, I did play Doom a little while back, and I enjoyed that. Yeah, so it's still got its magic to a degree. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Mike, this has been an excellent conversation. You know, insightful from all the D community, the stuff that you're doing now. Looking forward to all the work that's coming ahead in the future, both from the D community and from Mike from Korea. I'm going to give you the last words if you want to shout anything out to the audience.
Yeah. If you come around to the D community, please participate in the forums. We've got a good group of people there, a lot of helpful people there who can answer your questions. Of course, these days, all the kids go to Discord. So there's a great group of people there in Discord too. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you find that you enjoy the D language, we are always looking for people to help us out to make it even better. So we'd love to have you raise your hand.